Hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer and on this occasion I am joined by my close associate Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And you know what happens when the Eamon Holmes and David Blaine of the Terrace get together? That's right. One of us is an amiable host of daytime television, the other is a lunatic sorcerer. We're going to take part in one of the most excruciating interviews ever broadcast on breakfast TV. It's going to be monosyllabic and monotone, and at the end, one of us is going to have a drawing of an eye on our hand.
That was really weird, wasn't it?
I went back and watched it on YouTube. It's fucking hilarious. Honestly, it's actually even worse than you remember from the time. So yes,
David, I thought some of David Blaine's stuff was really good. I remember maybe one of his first kind of shows where he goes out and kind of does magic, like kind of street magic cool. Or whatever it's called.
I'd never really seen stuff
really
like
cool.
that before.
But then it just became like really odd. I remember he was suspended in a kind of glass box above the Thames for a kind of protracted period of time. I can't remember what men's magazine, it might have been Loaded or Nuts or Zoo or whatever rubbish was about at the time. And like obviously said like he wasn't eating during the magic trip, and they attached a kind of McDonald's meal to a helicopter and then just flew it up to the glass box.
What an extraordinary waste of money.
But the thing is, what an extraordinary like rubbish trick. Like I want a trick where, I don't know, somebody picks the card that I've picked, or I don't know, you something incredible that just takes a couple of minutes, like sitting in a glass box for a few weeks. That's not a magic trick. They'd draw an eye on your hand and take the mick out of Eamon Holmes. Well, that's funny, but it's not a magic trick.
There was one of the tricks that was shown when it cut away from David Blaine's showing of his tricks. He trapped himself in ice for 3 days. And it's like, that's great if you're like a survivalist or whatever, but it doesn't make for great television. David Copperfield making the Great Wall of China disappear. Now that, if you're the invading Mongol hordes, you could have really done with David Copperfield in your team. But just, living in a Perspex box for a while, getting rotten fruit pelted at you, that is not really used to man or beast.
Who was the two guys? What was their show? Were they magicians? What was
Siegfried
the one
and Roy?
Mauled by a tiger?
Yes, Siegfried and Roy. In fact, I'm sure in early iterations I have compared this to the Siegfried and Roy of the Terrace. Two fabulous, well-coiffured magicians. One of us is sadly no longer with us because he slapped his white tiger around a bit and the tiger just got annoyed and just took his anger out on him.
I mean, I'd be annoyed if you slapped me around. I don't think I would maul you, but I'd certainly be annoyed.
I mean, but I suppose if I had the power and the instinct to kill and somebody was like sort of just like tweezing my whiskers and just kind of prodding me in the eye, I'd be furious and my carnivorous instincts would just take over and I'd have to go for you. I'm really sorry. But listen, Shaughan, we're not here to talk about magic and illusions. We're going to talk about some lower league Scottish football. Shaughan and I are back once again to analyse the best matches from the Championship, League One and League Two. It won't be fun by any means. We've given up on trying to have a laugh years ago, but it might eat into 88 minutes of your day, and you can't say fairer than that. And I suppose, Shaughan, before we start, just have to say thank you to everyone who got in touch with us about the podcast we recorded last week after Scotland's extraordinary 4-2 victory over Denmark. We had a brilliant time recording it, so it's nice to know that people enjoyed listening back to it.
Yeah, very much so. I got a couple of messages. It was kind of like people that stopped me at my work to say how much they enjoyed it. So that was good to know that people enjoyed what we were putting out there. But as you say, it was class to put together. So I'm glad people enjoyed listening to it.
I wish people would get in touch with us and say, I love the coverage of Forfar Athletic the other week. Never going to happen. Would be nice. Never going to happen. I don't think like Forfar Athletic beating Dumbarton 4-1 is going to have the same galvanising effect in the nation as Scotland qualifying for a World Cup. But listen, you can live in hope.
It doesn't resonate enough, does it? It doesn't resonate as much.
It should, but it doesn't. Shaughan, is everything good with you?
Yeah, really good. What about you?
I've got to share a mortifying experience I had with a lower league superstar last week at work. So most people, so if you know, I work in a university. I went to get a coffee with my mate last Thursday morning, and we were just chatting away, no bother. And walking towards me in the opposite direction was the long-time Stranraer midfielder and sometimes Stranraer interim manager, Scott Robertson.
Ah, class.
And so when I was walking by, I noticed that I went, that's Scott Robertson, just as he was in front of me. So obviously, if somebody said like, that's Shaughan McGuigan, you kind of stop and be like, all right. And so he did the same. He's like, all right. And he says, oh, listen, mate, I'm really into my lower league football and I recognise you for your time at Stranraer. He's like, all right, cool. I was like, oh, you still involved? He says, I'm coaching at Kilmarnock now, and he's studying the game. He says, yeah, I always quite watch you at Stranraer. I remember when you took over the club, you gave that post-match interview and you said you didn't like football, but you enjoyed winning. He kind of sort of laughed at that and just said, oh, I didn't really mean that. I was just sort of like in the heat of the moment. And I said, well, I'll let you crack on. And now, anytime I see Scott Robertson at work, I'm going to have to hide from him, because I think he would gladly go the rest of his life without ever having to interact with me again. And for that, I'm really sorry that I've made his place of education that slightly less magical. Sorry, Scott.
That doesn't sound that bad. I remember
it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing.
I remember it was. Remember when Mixu Patalainen on? It might have been one of the last episodes.
It was in Edinburgh.
Before Christmas, maybe 1 year. And like I believe his partner stays in Burnt Island. So like sometimes you'll see him in Kirkcaldy or in Fife or whatever. But I'd never seen him in Fife before. And this was before he'd been on the show. So it's not as if there was any kind of link to us whatsoever that I could just go across and speak to him. And it was Marks and Spencer's in Kirkcaldy, and he was in the same aisle as me, but at the bottom. And it was just such a shock to see Mixu Patalainen, and I sure got it. And I went, oh, there's Mixu Patalainen. But he heard me, and then he looked up, but rather than just say, oh, hi, I'd love to say I'm aware, I just ran away. I just ran to a completely different aisle to try and hide from him. Mortifying. Absolutely mortifying.
Just like sort of nod and be like, all right, and he'd probably just say, all right, to say, why would you hide? I suppose your fight or flight instinct kicked in, and Shaughan, yours was to avoid confrontation and just to get out of there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I just panicked and kind of hung about the dips for a while until him and his girlfriend went to pay for their shopping.
So there you go. There's myself and Shaughan's excruciating encounters with lower league superstars. So fantastic. Now, Shaughan, before we get into the big games that have taken place over the last 7 days in Scottish football, we really have to start with the big changes in the dugout in the Championship. Earlier in the week, Dougie Imrie left Greenock Morton to join Raith Rovers. News reports suggested this was in the pipeline on Monday, and sure enough, 24 hours later, he was announced as a new gaffer at Starks Park. Now, I am led to believe you follow the Rovers, so I'd like your opinion on this. What you made of the Rovers hiring Dougie Imrie as a new manager?
I think I'm okay with it. I get the impression it's not universally popular, and I kind of understand why. And like in terms of the reasons that I've seen so far from like Rovers fans online is things like his style of play, or maybe how he comes across after games. And I think why that is maybe so important to Rovers fans at this moment in time is because I suppose that's probably part of the reason. Those two things are part of the reason why Barry Robson was so unpopular, like the style of play and how he would come across after a game. And you look at, certainly if you look at Dougie Imrie, certainly his first season or two at Morton, I thought they were rancid to watch. Like one of the worst teams in the Championship to watch in terms of even if the game was level, they would slow everything down. They, like at all points, a set piece, a throw in, everything was very, very slow. They were direct. Like the worst example was you would have Lewis Strapp playing at left back. They would get a throw in and let a kind of right hand side, like quite far up the park. They would just walk over. Like they would walk over as if they were defending a 1-0 lead and he'd just been substituted. Like that's how long it would take him to stroll over to take that throw in. So if that's your exposure to Morton as a Raith Rovers fan, I can understand why you have reservations about the appointment, I suppose. However, like what has he been at Morton now? Like 4 seasons maybe?
Yeah.
Like 4 years. So obviously we've been doing this podcast now for a long time. So we try and dip into everybody. But I was thinking about the fact that every time we've dipped into Dougie Imrie's tenure or Morton in general over the last 4 or 5 years, it's always felt very positive. And I think generally when you bring in a manager, you look at their CV and it'll be, so Barry Robson, for example, he had that really good spell at Aberdeen, then he had that really bad spell at Aberdeen. Or Ian Murray, brilliant at Dumbarton, quite good at Airdrie, not very good at St Mirren.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose the interesting thing with Dougie Imrie is, as much as I appreciate it, it's maybe not an exciting appointment. However, I'm not entirely sure there's a massive blot on his CV at this moment in time, and that might come. It might even come at Raith Rovers, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But I always get the impression, or I've always got the impression, that for every single season he's had at Morton, they have punched above their weight. And I don't mean like it's not Airdrie challenging for the title, punching above their weight. But generally speaking, it's always felt like he has a squad of players that on paper you would feel would be in a relegation battle or would struggle to keep their heads above water. But they finished 5th twice. I think they finished 6th. And if the 7th place finish was where he took over, which was a shambles that I think it was Gus McPherson that had left.
That's
right. That's his lowest place position. So I do think that in terms of how you normally look at a managerial CV when a new guy comes in, I think everything feels okay and there's no real negatives.
Yeah.
So I think in general I am reasonably positive about this appointment.
That sounds about right. I think there's fine. That's how you describe it. Fine, because there's no outstanding periods on his CV. I think his time at Morton, you say punched above his weight. I think that he has pretty much done everything. I think there's a glass ceiling at Morton. He's hit against it. But I think that his Morton teams have generally been good for their level. I don't think they've punched above the weight. I think that you've got what you've expected from them. A mid-table championship finishes.
Yeah, but do you not think that their budget, so when you think about, I think for a full-time team, their budget has probably been on the low side. I think their budget is certainly probably been on the low side by championship standards. And then other things that we've maybe discussed in the past and is that how maybe things behind the scenes, if they are perhaps chaotic or not where you would want them to be, that could seep into what's happening on the park. And I don't think Morton has always been in the best place behind the scenes. But again, I kind of feel like that hasn't really hampered them that much. And I suppose the other thing, in terms of a positive, if you're looking at it from a Raith Rovers perspective, the amount of times where Morton have signed a player and we've been like, I'm not so sure about that signing. But it just feels like that Dougie Imrie is able to apply some kind of alchemy. So, like Robbie Muirhead, for example, or George Oakley, were like, they've barely scored any goals in their entire career. And then 9 months later, they're one of the top goal scorers in the championship and have probably scored more goals in one season than they have in their entire career put together. So he seems to eke out more from players on an individual level, eke out more from the squad in general. And in terms of Raith Rovers, the fact that they are probably a kind of, it feels like they're very much kind of mid-table jobbers. If he can get an extra place or two from them, then suddenly they are maybe 4th or 5th rather than 6th or 7th. So no, I think it makes sense.
I suppose as well, Dougie Imrie's for a long time wanted a chance at a higher level. I mean, not a higher level. That's I'm confusing what I'm saying there. Maybe a chance at a bigger club who are perhaps slightly more ambitious than Greater Morton. I think there's the acknowledgement that given the way that Morton are structured, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's always going to be a bit of a glass ceiling for them. That's unless there's an injection of cash, it's going to help them recruit a higher calibre player and so on. They're always just going to be at best a mid-table championship team. Raith Rovers, however, have got slightly larger aspirations. I think that Rovers see themselves as a team who should be challenging for the top 4 most seasons, rather than a team that could get into the top 4, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. Although I think if you were to take the last 30 years, then they haven't been a club that's challenging at the top end of the championship. But certainly the board that's come in have
right, okay,
and quite rightly they've set goals. They've set themselves goals. I suppose in terms of Raith being a good championship team. I said this on Pie and Bovril on Monday night. I thought it wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion, even though it had been reported in a variety of places that Raith were closing in, I think was the phrase. Why I thought that maybe Dougie Imrie might not take it as he'd, I think, reportedly turned down the Partick Thistle job in the summer rather than Partick Thistle turning him down, which was interesting. And I think in terms of, so let's say he keeps Rovers in the Championship, which I'd like to think he will do. Not a foregone conclusion because they're struggling at this moment in time, have a very difficult December fixture list. But let's say next season, Championship football, like Raith have to replace the pitch next season. So they have to put in a new AstroTurf Park. That's not cheap. So I did wonder if Raith had potentially suggested that next season's budget might be very similar to what he has at Morton currently. Okay. And maybe he'll be in the same position next season at Raith as he has been in the last 3-4 seasons with Morton. But no, I thought his, maybe I looked too much into it. Maybe it wasn't I don't know if you watched did you watch his interview?
No, I've not had the chance to see it. I mean, it's been a bit of a funny week this week, just been really busy with other stuff.
So literally, like, Davy Hancock brings him in and he says, welcome to Raith, blah, blah, blah. How's your timeline been? And one of the first things he says is, it's really nice to feel wanted. Now, maybe that didn't mean anything at all, but I did wonder if, remember how last season ended where his assistant Andy Millen was essentially, didn't have his contract renewed, and I think Dougie Imrie did potentially put out there at some point recently that he would like to negotiate a new deal, which maybe hadn't happened because I think his deal at Morton was up at the end of this season. So I didn't know if that was a kind of pointed comment. It's really good to feel wanted. But certainly one of the first things he said in the interview. But certainly seems very upbeat. Seems very positive about coming to Raith, as you would expect for the opening interview. I did think it was interesting. All the kind of touchstones of the interview. He talked about playing attractive football. He talked about how he feels as a manager he should be involved in the community aspect of Raith Rovers, which Barry Robson didn't seem to be interested in. So I did wonder if he was primed for those questions and answers. But regardless, I thought it was a decent kind of 5 or 6 minute interview from him. So no, I can understand why people maybe have misgivings about the appointment, but I think broadly it's a positive appointment.
And I think on top of that, you got a guy who's coming in there that's absolutely desperate to prove himself.
Yep.
I think that we've spoken about Dougie Imrie in the past, having met him on A View from the Terrace. He's good company. I thought he was a good guest on the show, but he always gave off the impression that he needs people to doubt him, and that really brings out the best in him, like to prove people wrong. And I think that rather than having someone that's like from Robson who's on the way down, really, a kind of disappointing spell at Aberdeen, goes to the Rovers, ultimately doesn't work out. You've got a guy that's on the way up. I think he has pretty much achieved all he could have got out of Morton, it's fair to say. And now he's had the opportunity. This is the way when you think management should work, where you do well at one, like a smaller club, you get a chance to move to a bigger one. It doesn't always work out like that, but in your old school football manager, I'm going to start off by going to St Anthony's in the West of Scotland 3rd Division and take them to the Champions League, or end up the Manchester United job or whatever. It feels like this is the right way to do it. And I think that if Imrie can do well there, I think it's for bigger clubs to take notice of you. I think you're going to be noticed if you're doing a good job at the Rovers more than you might be noticed if you're doing a good job at Greenock Morton, for instance.
That's interesting. Why do you think that, I suppose?
I don't know. I think in the Scottish football pecking order, and this is just purely my perception, I may be completely wrong, you might disagree with me here, I just feel like there's more eyes on Rovers. I feel like they're a bigger club. Maybe it's the way that they're covered in, like BBC Scotland's Championship football on a Friday night. When we think about the Rovers, I think we think about a team that tries to, this is the perception, they play attractive football. You've got like a guy like Dylan Easton there. I think if people don't know much about the Raith Rovers, or they haven't seen them for a while, they would think, well, they've got Dylan Easton, so he's a great player. They play good football. It all goes through him. And I know from talking to you that hasn't been the case recently, certainly under the last days of Robson. But I just think there's a perception of Rovers that is different to the likes of Greenock Morton or the likes of like Airdrie or Queen's Parker, for instance, if you look at the teams sort of round at the bottom end of that division. And I think if Imrie does well there, I think he's got the opportunity to go even higher.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd kind of forgotten how young he was. I mean, as much as he's been involved in management now for a few seasons, he's still only 42. So still really young, still learning. And you're right. If he makes a success of this, then presumably he will be looked at favourably and moves up the food chain again. So a good opportunity for hopefully Raith and Dougie Imrie.
And a favourable-ish tie coming up at the weekend against Alloa Athletic in the Scottish Cup.
I am not. Yes, I think ish is the right way to put it. Like Raith just don't score.
Alloa are all right.
They just don't score. Like Raith, not only do they not score, they don't really create any chances. Like defensively, they're fine. But I would say I was overwhelmingly positive about their chances on Saturday. I think bringing Imrie in probably helps. I like Hanlon. I like Paul Hanlon. I like listening to him. He's clearly a good egg. But that's 2 games now. The 3-0 defeat to Airdrie and the 0-0 draw with Arbroath. But actually, Raith haven't forced a save out of the opposing goalkeeper. So no, I was more worried going into it with Hanlon. I'm a wee bit more upbeat about their chances now that Imrie's involved. So yes, I'd like to think they can get through, but I certainly don't think it'll be easy.
Well, good luck to you, Shaughan. I hope that he can improve the Rovers' fortunes, carry them up the table to where I believe they should be, challenging for the top 4, despite the fact there's 30 years of evidence apparently that suggests they don't do that. But Shaughan, we'll get into the football now. We're talking about the managerial stuff. We'll get into the big games, and we'll kick off this podcast by looking at the action at the top of the Championship and focusing on one side in particular, and that's Partick Thistle. We can only really focus on the one side because Thistle played on Saturday and they played on Tuesday, and those 2 results they have had massive ramifications for the summit of the division. Now, on Saturday, they defeated league leader St Johnstone 2-2 goals to 1 at Firhill. That result moved them within 3 points of the Sainties, and now they are level with them after following up with a 1-0 win over Dunfermline Athletic on Tuesday. So it's actually remarkable just how well those 2 teams are doing. It was only till I checked the league table today that there's an 11-point gap between first and second, and then Ayr United in third place. So we can look at both the games. I think we'll see how we get on with this one. I think we can freewheel this one compared to the games from League 1 and League 2 that we're going to look at. But I suppose, Shaughan, we'll start with... Do you want to start with last night's game against Dunfermline Athletic? Because it's a game that you bought on stream, finish 1-0. Aidan Fitzpatrick scoring midway through the first half. Slight degree of fortune in his goal there that Billy Terrell decided to not save it. the second time actually this month that they've had a degree of fortune from a goalkeeping error in their favour. But I watched the highlights just before we jumped on this podcast, Shaughan. You actually bought a pay-per-view for this game, so I'm eternally grateful to you for doing that. How do you think Thistle looked in this match?
In terms of going into it, where I thought Partick Thistle might struggle is in terms of that St Johnstone game. St Johnstone had the bulk of possession, and I think Partick Thistle done a lot of defending. I think they defended very well, but I presume that in terms of if you don't have the ball, I would imagine the game is a bit more tiring. It kind of saps your energy more if you have possession. So I thought there's not a huge amount of turnaround between Saturday and Tuesday, and I think the issue with Lee Ashcroft was that he is 1 booking away from being suspended.
Okay.
So I think that's why there was certainly a suggestion that he wouldn't play against Dunfermline, and that was the case. And I think Partick Thistle really, really miss him. He didn't play at Stars Park through injury, whatever it was, 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I thought they really missed him on that occasion. So I did actually think that Dunfermline had a good opportunity on Tuesday night. Got the stream, as you say. And for the first 10 minutes, I was delighted that I got it. I thought it was really open. I thought that both teams looked quite bright. Andy Todd missed a chance from quite a well-worked corner routine.
He starts off at the back post, peels across the 6-yard box and at the front post and just, this guy swept it, just kissed the post on the way out.
But there was quite a number of chances. In terms of those first kind of 10-15 minutes, I think both teams had maybe one decent chance each and maybe one or two half chances each. I was like, this is a good game. Both teams really feel like or seem like they're up for it at this moment in time. The remaining 75 minutes weren't quite as good. And actually, as soon as Partick Thistle got that goal, I don't know what it was, but almost instantly, I felt like something changed. Dunfermline seemed like very nervy. Like they didn't create almost nothing at all between that goal going in and the 25th minute. It was all half chances after that moment for Dunfermline. And not that Partick Thistle were creating lots, but certainly they were they looked the better team, they looked the fresher team, and they were worthy winners. And I think the impressive thing about that is, like, it always feels like if you get a really good result on a Saturday, there could be a case of the, like, after the Lord Mayor's show type of thing. And when you're coming against an informed team in Dunfermline who also have quite a good record at that ground, I did wonder if they could drop points, but I was hugely impressed by them.
Yeah, what about from watching the highlights, I was kind of dipping in and out because, like I say, I've had quite a lot of work on, so I couldn't give them my full commitment. It looked as though Tony Watt passed up a number of chances. There was one where he got put through in goal, lifted the ball over Terrell, but just went past the post, hit the post early on in the second half. What did you make of his performance?
Yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from in terms of the chances, but see, just in terms of a performance in general, I thought it looked quite bright. And especially coming on the back of the performance again on Saturday, which we'll dip into against St Johnstone. Like Tony Watt's like a funny player. I think when we spoke about him in the summer, you might have 12 games where he's okay, 12 games where he's excellent, 12 games where you're not entirely sure he's there. Mm-hmm. But I think at this moment in time, he is certainly one of the two former camps in terms of being good or just being generally pretty positive. So no, I thought in general he was reasonably bright.
It's that way he plays. We've spoken about it before, and just the difference he is from Brian Graham, because Brian Graham's pretty much going to stay between the posts up as high as possible to win flick-ons, hold up the ball, play his teammates, whereas Watt just wants to get involved a lot more, and I think by him dropping deep, I think it's just a lot more difficult for teams to contain. And when you're if you're able to pull central defenders out of position, then you've got the likes of Logan Fitzpatrick and Aidan Chalmers, fuck's sake. You know what I mean? The two of them to be able to go in and weave a bit in behind. The goal, Shaughan, we mentioned there, it was struck about midway through the first half. Was that a deserved lead for Thistle? Could you see a goal coming at that point?
I thought at that point in the game, I think it maybe about 15-20 minutes, Partick started to become more of the dominant side. I thought the first 10-15 minutes was quite open, as I said, could have been 1-1 at that point. But no, it felt like momentum was building. I do actually think that as much as it was a decent strike from Fitzpatrick, I thought the defending was poor for Dunfermline. In terms of like Chilicola Mullen kind of allowed him to come inside, but that wasn't the worst aspect. I mean, it was a well struck shot, but it wasn't a great finish. And I thought Billy Terrell, like, he got down in time. I'm not entirely sure if he got his hand to it or if it kind of slithered under his body. But regardless, he should have done better. But no, I think at that point that was where Partick were starting to exert a wee bit of dominance in the game. But after that, like, I know Neil Lennon said afterwards that he felt that they were poor in the first half. I would agree. He said that he thought that they were excellent in the second half. Dunfermline, I would disagree. I thought they exerted a wee bit of pressure in the last, kind of say, 15 to 20 minutes. But no, I certainly didn't think Dunfermline were excellent at any point in the game. And in fact, if, like Mark Wilson said afterwards, like, I know we only get 60-second snippets free to air from Partick Thistle, but he said that actually they probably should have been further ahead before the kind of tension started in the last kind of 50 minutes of that. I would agree with that rather than Neil Lennon.
Some good chances there. One other player I wanted to ask about before we maybe move on to the St Johnstone game from the weekend is Oisin Smith. I see he's been getting a really good pop, and again, I think we've discussed him in the past where basically you've got someone who can just sit in front of the defence and you just allow guys like Sosa, Chalmers, Fitzpatrick, what they can just go on and do their thing and just have a laugh, and he's like the security blanket, for want of a better word. What did you make of his display?
So it was interesting because it's probably the first time I've been able to properly watch him during the 90 minutes where he's in form, I suppose. So he was quite poor at Starks Park where Raith beat Thistle 2-0. Which obviously I was thankful about. But see, last night, what I thought was really interesting about him was I think you could potentially have a player who sits in front of a back four, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but he'll take possession. I mean, like another player who sits in front of the back four, like they might take possession and they might play quite a safe pass. Like maybe they feel like they have to give it to somebody else who can then be the creative element of that team. But the interesting thing about Smith is he's quite happy to do that part. So he'll maybe play at 5 or 10 yards, but that's not all there is about his game. Yeah. His range of passing is excellent. Like there was a point where I think it might be on the left hand side, and he's pinged it maybe like 50 yards onto the right wing, and it was right on to, it would have been Logan Chalmers' foot. Like it was just a great ball. And then the amount of times where he would take possession, look up, and then maybe play a forward pass through the lines, like, and suddenly it's like a kind of forward ball. It's not. He never ever just looks for the safe pass. So protects the back four, but is also maybe a surprisingly attacking player as well. I was really impressed by him.
Yeah, I was just checking there when you were speaking there. He's on a season-long loan from St Mirren, which is huge for them because I think a player with all those qualities, very difficult to replace for Partick Thistle if he was to leave in January. Big lad as well. I mean, he's a Stephen Robinson player, so yes, he's going to be big and Irish. That's how he likes him. From Dunfermline's perspective, Shaughan, was there anything that you noticed? Any points there that's worth making about them?
Just in terms of like Otu came in, I thought he was poor. Played a back three. I thought he was poor. I thought Andy Todd looked knackered. Like Neil Lennon alluded to that after the game, and I think just in general, I suppose it was a kind of forward three that started with. So like Lonnie McLeod didn't do very much. Jefferson Caceres was ultimately anonymous. So the front three just didn't work at all. They looked a bit brighter when they brought on the substitutes, of which Chris Kane was one. And then Lennon just went for it. Lennon just absolutely went for it the last kind of 15, 20 minutes. So as much as it was nominally a kind of front pairing for the last 15, 20 minutes of Kane and Andy Todd, there was another three players behind that were essentially just told, listen, you just move right up. So when they would play long, it was almost like a front five, and it was they created a couple of half chances, but nothing that Partick Thistle really had to worry about. It was quite funny because I don't know who the Thistle co-commentator was. I mean, he was good, but like for those last 50 minutes, you could tell he was really panicking. So he was saying, "Oh, we need to make changes here. Like just they've got so many weight and numbers in the forward area, so really to change it." But the thing was, because they had so many players playing in advanced positions, for the last 15 minutes, the best goal scoring opportunities fell to Partick Thistle because every time they got on the ball and then broke, Dunfermline didn't have anybody like defending. So actually, watching it as a neutral, I was like, actually, I think there's a good chance here that Thistle can get a second rather than maybe conceding to make it 1-0. But ultimately, it finished 1-0. But no, it was I suppose it's been mentioned a few times now for Dunfermline, but they have a very talented young team. But I think the commentator said that the weekend win against Morton, that their average age was 20, just over 22, and they only had one player who was over 24. And that's a good thing. But I suppose you might have a kind of variation in performances and
of course
that you find, because like they were well worthy of their win on Saturday. I thought. But I thought they looked reasonably poor actually on Tuesday night. But maybe that's to be expected from a team that has so little experience.
Yeah, it's just it's a bit unfortunate they can't maybe get another couple of experienced players in there. Just say if you were able to, in an ideal world, say another 2 or 3 like this through the spine of the team, maybe not too dissimilar to Arbroath, for instance. And maybe if you had like a Ryan Flynn or a Tam O'Brien in there, they could really help galvanise that team. But you can't. They play for Arbroath. That's not how these things work. Well, John, we'll jump back to Saturday. Maybe we have done this the wrong way around, because I think what happened on Saturday perhaps adds a bit more colour to what happened on Tuesday. But nevertheless, Partick Thistle 2, St Johnstone 1. This was Dan O'Reilly opening the scoring early doors. Tony Watt got a second in the first half stoppage time, and Josh McPake's effort midway through the second period, nothing more than a consolation. And I think what I found very interesting about this match was these teams met each other on the opening day of the season, and St Johnstone absolutely shelled Partick Thistle, winning this match 5-1. Thistle actually opened the score. In fact, I can't remember who scored. It was a really, really nice goal early on, and I think that, the expression, they scored too early. I think Partick Thistle scored too early in that match, and Josh McPake in particular ran riot. Am I right in saying that Thistle maybe made the mistake of going toe-to-toe with St Johnstone in that game, and on Saturday they were just a wee bit more sensible, like not allowing Josh McPake to run into space, getting Ben McPherson just to do a total number on him and nullifying him for the match? I know he scored in the game, but am I right in saying that his influence wasn't quite as strong as it had been perhaps earlier in the season?
Yeah, I thought this game was quite interesting. I know neither of us are particularly tactics savvy, and we generally don't talk about tactics on this podcast.
Vibes, mate. That's all we do. Just vibes.
But I thought, in terms of reading about the game, I thought in terms of what Mark Wilson said afterwards. He said that we, again, in the 62-second snippet, but he talked about the fact that under no circumstances could Thistle do what they'd done on the start of the season. They absolutely couldn't be as easy to play through, and they had to ultimately be deeper and more compact. But I thought what was quite interesting was I normally expect, if a team wants to defend and maybe play on the counter, that you maybe play one up top. But it felt like Partick Thistle played like a 4-4-2, but the two banks of four just played unbelievably deep. So there was points where you could see where St Johnstone were going forward, and there'd potentially be like maybe 8 or 9 Partick Thistle players in the box, which feels, I mean, that almost feels like overkill. However, when they did play on the counter, you had Tony Watt and Alex Samuel, and actually, as much as I've been quite critical of Alex Samuel for almost all of his time in Scottish football, he seems to be like doing quite well this season.
Yeah,
and it felt like they very much had the kind of, I think it was 60-40 in terms of possession, but I think when Thistle were able to get forward, it felt like they were able to put St Johnstone under pressure, and actually, judging by the highlights, they maybe created as many chances as St Johnstone, despite the fact that St Johnstone had the lion's share of possession. So it was an interesting way to go at St Johnstone, and I suppose ultimately it worked.
Yeah, the two goals were very good. I thought Dan O'Reilly's for the first one, I don't know about you, but
it's an own goal.
It's an own goal, right? I had to watch it back a couple of times, and at first when I was writing down my notes, said that he passes the ball into the net, and I thought, no, I need to change my terminology for that. Nudges the ball into the net, and then I was like, it looks like he's taking a terrible first touch, and the ball's just happened to go into the net off it. But I think it is, I can't remember who's in front of him.
It's Sidibe. I think it, because it feels like it's a terrible couple of minutes for Sidibe, because he has I mean, it's not a great chance, but it's a half decent chance at one end that he puts in the side net, and then within whatever it is, 5 minutes later, it comes off him.
Yeah,
but it's an own goal.
I would say it's quite the goal itself is quite well worked. There we go. There's two parts. There's us. We're not tactics guys, but we can say, hey, that goal's well worked. But the short corner, like where I think it's Chalmers plays it to Sosa. He feeds it to Fitzpatrick. So it's quite well worked, the short corner, in terms of the players. The movement's really good. And Fitzpatrick's ball along the front of goal. I think from the St Johnstone perspective, you'd be pissed off the fact that the ball's actually allowed to travel quite a long way, and it's low as well. It's allowed to basically go from the byline almost all the way across the 6-yard box to where O'Reilly/Sidibe are, and it hits off him to go into the net. At the same token, it's very well worked. I'd also be pissed off as well, actually, from a St John's perspective, when you think about Tony Watt's goal. Fabulously struck. But I think it's Diabate and McAleer just appear to leave Watt to each other. And it's only when the ball's in the back of the net and the pair of them turn to face each other, it's almost like, I thought you were getting him. Hey, but I thought you were getting him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if having Alex Samuel up top there, given that he's a big lump that can occupy defenders, if, I don't know, Diabate was in two minds who he should be going with or whatever, but it just felt that it's quite unlike what we've seen from St John's. And I think on the whole, teams have had to work hard to get their goals against them. I don't necessarily think Thistle had to work too hard here, despite the fact, very good finish from Watt, and the build-up play to O'Reilly/CDB's goal was well worked.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, the way, because trying to remember, was a kind of a reasonable long ball, or not necessarily a long ball forward, but I thought Samuel done well to kind of cushion whatever it was. He brought it down very well and then laid it off to Watt. So it still involved like a really good bit of control from Samuel, really good bit of layoff play, a really good finish. But I know what you mean. It could have been defended a wee bit better. But I suppose just in terms of general about St Johnstone, it feels like they have, and I don't think it's necessarily a huge concern, but it does feel like they've tapered off a bit in terms of defensively, in terms of like even their forward play, like McPake doesn't feel like he's causing as much bother as he did. Somebody like Baird, who we wondered about as a signing, it feels like he's going through a kind of tough spell at this moment in time. Who else? Rhys McAleer has kind of regressed a bit over the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks. So it does feel like there's a general theme and trend about St Johnstone in terms of their performance. Like, I almost felt like that first half against Partick Thistle was a continuation of the second half against Queen's Park.
Yeah, in fact, I was actually just about to say that, Shaughan. I've said that teams have maybe had to work a wee bit hard, or teams have to work hard to score against them. Maybe I'm thinking back to the early days of the season when I really felt they were riding the crest of the wave. Mm-hmm. You know, that we were talking about how relegation's actually been good. I think that point still holds weight. The relegation has ultimately been a net positive for St Johnstone because the team feel like in a far better position now to go back into the top flight than they were when they left it. But the 2-2 draw with Dunfermline from the weeks previously, you know, to chuck away a goal in 90. I know it took a big deflection on his way in from Andy Todd, but nevertheless, still disappointing. And then to almost chuck it away against Queen's Park. And that wasn't, and other players than Josh Fowler scored in that match as well, which maybe tells its own story. But yeah, it feels like St Johnstone, I mean, they've got the Scottish Cup tie coming up against Cove Rangers. You would fancy them massively to beat Cove Rangers, despite the fact that there has been ripples and improvement. And I do think that the cup competitions against lower opposition, certainly presentable opposition, I think it can have basically just allow you to refocus. You get a win under your belt, everyone's confident and everyone's feeling good about themselves. As long as you win. I mean, if Cove Rangers win, then I think there's perhaps a little bit of soul searching for Simo Valakari and his team to do. But I would say it's more of a blip than a trend, if you know what I mean. I think that they've not been at their very best across the past 3 matches, even if they've taken 4 points from them. But still, I fancy them to beat Cove Rangers, and then they're back to league action at the start of December against Dougie Imrie's Raith Rovers. So we'll find out just exactly what the long-term effects are of Partick Thistle narrowing the gap in the title race.
I mean, I was glad Partick Thistle won these 2 games. Not because I'm completely anti St Johnstone, but just because I want to see a kind of title battle in the championship, and it might not pan out that way. I do think if you look at who the kind of players that both teams were kind of bringing off the bench at the weekend, like St Johnstone's bringing on Stevie Marlin and Sam Stanton. Partick Thistle, amongst others, are bringing on like Cammy Logan and like Luke Macbeth and Stevie Lawless. And listen, they're decent players, but I do think
not
that
the
St
same
Johnstone,
calibre.
Yeah, I think St Johnstone have a strength and depth, and I do think January is key for Partick Thistle. Can they keep hold of the loan players? Because I know you've said that Smith will be there for the season. I would imagine if if they wanted to, though, that St Mirren could probably recall him. So if Partick Thistle can keep hold of their loan players and then maybe just bring in maybe another forward option or maybe another fullback, for example, then that might just give them a wee bit more strength and depth to challenge St Johnstone. But at this moment in time, as much as I've been hugely impressed by Thistle, I still fancy St Johnstone to pull away at some point, but hopefully not for a wee while.
Is there anything to be said about the referee's performance from this match? Because I did see it was a Mark St Johnstone Twitter account that had face shot Don Robertson's face onto... Oh, did he have a Partick Thistle top on? It's something like that. I think there was question marks about... Well, certainly there was one decision that actually caught my eye that didn't go in their favour. And there's an odd moment where Lee Ashcroft hacks the ball off the line. It goes into there. Then Sosa hangs a leg up in there and knocks it back to Josh Clark to catch. Now,
that's never a pass back.
Right. Something similar happened in the match between Montrose and East Fife that we were going to talk about. So the two things happened on the same day, quite similar. One's a pass back, one deemed a pass back, one not.
I'm sure Sosa's, I think he actually had to he almost had to extend his leg backwards. I mean, I've only seen one angle of it, but it looked like he extended his leg backwards and kind of curled his... I tried... Obviously, he kicked it over his own head, is how I'd picture it. And it went back into Josh Clark's hands. But I don't think for a minute that he meant that as a pass back. So no, I would disagree.
Well, that makes you and Don Robertson one and the same then. Fair enough.
In fairness, the St Johnstone commentators, the co-commentator, he mentioned it at the time, but the main commentator went, "No, I don't think that's a pass back."
Okay, maybe there might have been more happened in the match that judged that Mark St Johnstone Twitter account to do something like that. Maybe it didn't. Maybe they're blaming not wanting to get an indirect free kick for their defeat. Who knows? Just one final thing on Partick Thistle, Shaughan, before we move on. When I was watching the highlights for the game against Dunfermline, I thought that the Firhill surface is beginning to look a little bit threadbare. And it's happening as we're going into the winter months. And of course, we all know what happened back in, I think it was 21-22, when they were ground sharing with Queen's Park. That was the worst surface in the country at that point. It's not going to be as grievous this time. Old Thistle are the only tenants is their ground, but they're the only team using Firhill at the moment. But I just wonder if that could have a knock-on effect later on in the season.
Yeah, I think you're right. Potentially could. I suppose the other thing to bear in mind was, I think in Glasgow last night, it was like kind of -1, -2.
Very cold,
as much as I'm absolutely certain that the pitch was fine, maybe at the start of the game, I do wonder if it maybe kind of deteriorated over the 90 minutes. And I suppose the fact that it was played on Saturday and Tuesday maybe didn't help. But I totally agree. If their pitch is stinking, that won't help. I certainly won't help them if I play on it every 2 weeks.
It looked like Michael Carroll's front garden. Remember when he bought that mansion and he turned the garden into like a scrapyard and drove stockies around it? That's what the Thistle pitch looked like for a period. But anyway, that's enough about the top end of the Championship. We will go into League One, and we've teased it just there, but we'll talk about Montrose's 2-1 win over East Fife at Lynx Park. A penalty from Ewan Loudon and a very nice finish from Callum Sandilands bookended Andy Munro's header, and Mikey McKenna had the chance to tie the match late on from the spot, but Cammy Gill saved his penalty. This was a huge victory for Montrose, their first in almost 2 months, and it ends a miserable run where they took just 1 point from the previous 6 matches. They are still in 8th place, but they have put a wee gap between themselves and Cove Rangers and Kelty Hearts at the bottom. East Fife, meanwhile, still in 4th place, still on 22 points. Shaughan, give me your shoot thoughts on Montrose 2, East Fife 1.
I did. So I'd watched this game. I think I watched this game on Sunday. And then at the time I was like, wow, this game really is off everything. It has an indirect free kick. Like, that's always very exciting. It has a referee going off injured and they have to call out somebody from a fan to essentially be a lines person. That's exciting. It has a last minute penalty. That's really exciting. Then I watched that again before we'd done this podcast, and then remembered that the highlights jumped from the 45th minute straight to the 82nd minute.
Yes.
It's like, maybe the second half actually isn't that exciting in general. But I think to take your point, this feels like a massive win for Montrose. Like, even though they're kind of keeping their heads above Cove and Kelty, still a wee bit of a gap between Montrose and the teams above. And I think there's 6 ahead of Cove and 6 ahead of Kelty.
That's right.
This felt like it was certainly much needed. And I actually thought that Ian Campbell, when he was interviewed afterwards, I thought he might have been a wee bit harsh. I thought the first half, admittedly based on these 5 highlights, I thought the first half seemed reasonably even, and I'm guessing the second half had very little to talk about other than the last kind of 5 or 6 minutes. However, Stuart Petrie was quite enthusiastic about their performance in the first half, and rightly so. The fact that you are as good as a team that is ultimately challenging to get into the top 4 as East Fife are. So I'm pleased for Montrose. Hopefully the kind of green shoots of recovery. But if I was an East Fife fan, I don't think I would be too downbeat at how the result, you'd be disappointed. But performance-wise, I don't think I'd be too frustrated.
I suppose when Ian Campbell blew out his birthday candles earlier that day, he really, really, really wanted an East Fife win, and he was denied that. So his birthday's been ruined. So I think that's perhaps why he was a little bit more downbeat than anyone should normally be. But I agree with the points. Yeah, I think it was a huge win for Montrose, and it was great seeing Petrie. I think Petrie, when in his post-match interviews, you always get him the same. You know, he's always, even when they lose, he's always generally quite upbeat. And I think you have to be. I think he's had to be that for Montrose, given the decline in budgets, to the fact that they have sort of fallen away from the discussion. I think they've generally in the last couple of years been a team you'd consider to be like outsiders or reasonable contenders to get into the top 4. That's certainly not the case this year, and I think it's just consolidation is perhaps the most important thing. So getting that win was absolutely huge. And yeah, you're right about the lack of the lack of action over the course of the match, but the key moments, there's actually a lot to like, and there's a lot to discuss it. Now, 5 minutes into this game, this is Ba it controls a cross into the path of Rory Adams, and he concedes an indirect free kick. Was this different from Litsosa's?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, as a cross in the box, Ba kind of sticks out a leg and diverts it back to his goalkeeper. And I think he intentionally diverts it back to Rory Adams. I don't think Litsosa is doing the same thing. I think he is. I'm not entirely sure what he's doing. He's kind of backheels it over his own head. I don't think you're sending that back to the keeper. So I don't think Ba does anything wrong, but I do think Rory Adams shouldn't have picked it up ultimately.
What do you think about the concession of the penalty? Did Ba do anything wrong here when Blair Lyons just ultimately is just faster than him and just a wee bit more nimble, and then he just basically like collapses on top of him?
Aye, it's a weird challenge. It feels like almost that Ba, so I think Ba realises, I think he tries to nudge him, like maybe tries to like unbalance Lyons, but then he almost trips himself up in the process. And as he trips himself up, he then drags Blair Lyons down with him. That was interesting in terms of Ian Campbell's, like, it was only 2 minutes long. But he talks about the fact that East Fife aren't going to achieve anything if they make like mistakes as he did on the day. And he said, I don't want to, can't remember, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, I don't want to like name anybody, but we can't make mistakes like we did. I'm presuming this is one of the mistakes that he is alluding to.
Surprised he wasn't hooked at half time back, because that seems to be the general thing. I think, was it not 2 weeks in a row where he was both subbed off at half time in both matches?
It's weird.
I'm sure we mentioned that actually in an earlier podcast.
It's weird. I think that Ba, because I think he was voted man of the match recently as well. So it feels like
really good actually against Stennismuir, and the one that won, he kept Ewan O'Reilly quiet, and there's not a lot of fullbacks that do that in League One.
Yeah, so it feels like he has, when he's good, he is particularly good, but when he's bad, my goodness, he has several layers below that.
We also saw Alan Trouting try to replicate Kenny McLean's goal, actually a really good turn. The way he's able to create space for himself is really impressive, and not out of nowhere, he just hits the thing about like 45 yards. Just a great save, Cammy Gill running back, tip it into the net. Kasper Schmeichel, that's how you do it. You have to be quick off your feet if you want to stop shots like that from going into the net.
Do you know, see, just in general, I was quite pleased for Cammy Gill. So he had that save. He had another one or two saves before that, and then obviously the penalty save in the last minute. But it feels like he, like, not just this season, but it feels like he hasn't always had the best of times at Montrose. I'm not saying he's a poor keeper, but it feels like he sometimes goes through spells where he could do better, I suppose. And it was interesting, Stuart Petrie, I mean, he said it in a funny way, but it's like, it's been discussed recently at training about the fact that Montrose concede a lot of penalties, but Cammy Gill never seems to save any. But the fact that he saved that one in the last minute, like, everybody was delighted. But it was a brilliant save. But just in general,
I thought it was I thought it was a crap penalty more than anything else. It's at that height
so?
I think it is. It's at the height that goalkeepers really like, where it's sort of just about maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet off the ground.
But I thought he put it quite close to the corner.
I don't know.
It's not as if it was close to the keeper.
I don't want to take any credit away from Cammy Gill, because it is a good save, but I thought it's savable.
Well, I mean, it's savable because he saves it.
Obviously.
I thought it was a really good save.
Okay, well, listen, something, Shaughan, we don't have to agree all the time. Like, you make a point and I just go, yeah, totally, mate. Totally agree with you. I mean, there's not much to say. Andy Munro scores from a header, whacks off Terry Masson. Moran Masson later, he plays, Moran Masson later. It was him that gave away the penalty. So there, we don't need to do anything more about Terry Masson. Just sort of jostles. It's quite bad. He's jostling with Brian Easton, and sort of like a lunatic puppet, just throws his hand up into the air, and that's
his arm's kind of flapping, isn't it? I don't know how to describe it. It's just a really weird way to. It's always like he's not paying attention. But then, even if you're not paying attention in any scenario in life, I don't know why you would do that flappy thing with your arm. It's just a really weird way to do anything.
I said Terry Masson for years has been wanting to show everyone his marionette impression, and he picked the worst time ever to do it. The other thing as well I liked about this game, Shaughan, I liked there's something about the Callum Sandilands goal I thought was really funny. It's a great run from Blair Lyons, who looked like he had a really strong performance in this match. Really direct run from him, slips in Callum Sandilands, really nice pass, but Sandilands' shot, he hits it, and it seems to go underneath Rory Adams, but hit off his backside. But I mean, it's one of those things that is just almost like Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton and all the lads. I think they struggle to get their head around exactly what happened here. But it seems to whack off his arse and then somehow bounce up onto the crossbar, and then he's just there just to boop, nod it over the hit from close range. And then a referee gets subbed off as well for an injury as well. It's a lot happened, but not a lot happened in this game at the same time.
I enjoyed the East Fife commentator, because you're right, when kind of Sandilands was played in and he kind of tries to slip it under Adams, ricochets off him, hits the bar. But then there's two East Fife defenders kind of running in, so they kind of jump, I suppose, attempting to prevent the ball entering the net from Rudy Adams' backside. But of course it hits the bar, but their momentum is kind of going towards the net, but thankfully it kind of lands nicely for Sandilands just to nod in. But it's the East Fife commentator who goes, yes, it's like when he gets that save, yes, and then he goes,
there's the victory snatched from the jaws of defeat there for Montrose. One of the things, a couple of observations just on this one, Shaughan. The commentator at the start of East Fife TV, very, very good, by the way, so I'm not one to dig out their commentator, but he said it's been, I think he might have said it's been over 10 years since East Fife won at Links Park. I think he might have said that right at the very start. I thought, wow,
I never noticed that at all.
That's an interesting stat. So I went back to 2015, 2016. They actually last won at Links Park in September 2019. It was like Aaron Dunsmore got a brace and Ryan Wallace scored in a 3-1 win. And the previous season, they also won at Links Park. So I might be confused there, or the East Fife commentator might be confused. One of us is confused. It's probably more likely to be me than him. I can see that he knows a lot more about East Fife than I do. So, and another thing as well, Shaughan. Sorry, another observation. No Nathan Austin or Tommy Goss for the Fifers.
Yeah, and to be fair, Ian Campbell mentioned that about. He said, "I don't want to make excuses. However, we're minus a few forwards, and I suppose they felt. I think even Troughton maybe only mentioned only managed about kind of 55 minutes to an hour. I think he's coming back from injury as well. So I think when you are, I think East Fife are a good League One team, but I suppose there's only so many forward players you can have absent before it does start to have an impact.
Yeah. Final thing in this match, is Kerr Waddle likely to get a call up for Scotland to the World Cup?
Not yet, no.
No, we would need a King Ralph situation to happen before we ever see Kerr Waddle at the World Cup. I really like him, but I think there may be a few players ahead of him in the pecking order if, God forbid, anything was to happen to every single central defender in the Scottish top flight, the Championship, and most of League One. No games next week, of course. Scottish Cup third round. We don't tend to deal with that sort of stuff. We probably should. I've not written them down, so it's too late. Too late for me to go through and look at it. Maybe we should have done it when we were talking there. It doesn't matter. Anyway, we will drop into League Two. We could have been talking about Stranraer's stunning 4-0 win at the Spartans, perhaps the most surprise result of the whole weekend. We could be talking about Forfar Athletics' demolition of Dumbarton, a match that saw the Dumbarton players booed off the park at the end. But no, let's go for the 1-1 draw between East Kilbride and Edinburgh City at K Park. Innes Lawson put City in front after completing a lovely move, but Connor Young tied the game with a smashing free kick. East Kilbride are still in second place, but crucially, they're now just 1 point behind the Spartans at the top of the table, and Edinburgh City, they are up to 5 points, but they are still bottom. Now, the reason we are covering this game is because I was there. I couldn't make Stenisire's match against Peterhead. I was going to a pop concert that evening in Glasgow, so I'd taken something relatively close to home. So, Shaughan, you have done a lot of heavy lifting on this episode. It's time, take your shoes off, put your feet up, and ask me some questions about the football. Ask me anything you want about East Kilbride 1, Edinburgh City 1.
I have watched both sets of highlights for this. I watched Edinburgh City's and I've watched East Kilbride's, and it felt like the Edinburgh City were certainly the better of the two sides, and in fact both, interestingly and quite good to hear, I suppose both managers agreed as well that the Edinburgh City were unlucky not to win this game. What were your thoughts?
I'd probably lean more with Mick Kennedy's assessment than Michael McIndoe's, to be honest. I think you're right, they're broadly similar in their outlook of the game, but I think that Kennedy's is perhaps the more, probably slightly more in line with how I saw the game. I thought that you can basically break it into three parts. If you can divide the first half into two and then take the second half, I thought that East Kilbride, I beg your pardon, I thought Edinburgh City were the better team for about the first 25 minutes of the first half. Really, really good, really impressive stuff. And then I thought that for the second part of the second half, beg your pardon, the second half of the first half, I thought East Kilbride were a lot better. That culminated with them winning the foul that led to the free kick that Connor Young scored from. And the second half was a bit scrappy, but I thought that Edinburgh City were the better team in that half. The highlights, I thought that I watched East Kilbride's highlights for this one. I thought they were representative of the game. There wasn't all that much between the sides, but Edinburgh certainly had the better of the chances. I think there's a moment where Freddie Owens makes two saves, one of which was excellent with his feet. They might have had a shout for a penalty as well. Lewis MacArthur put a decent chance past the post midway through the second half. So I think it's a draw. A draw might be the fairer of the results here, but I think that East... Two teams beginning to let Edinburgh were the better two teams here, and I can understand why McIndoe was so positive off the back of it.
And in terms of that goal from Edinburgh, I thought like Zaid, like his through ball to Innes Lawson was excellent. I thought in general, albeit I'm just basing it on highlights, I thought Zaid looked like so creative and kind of, I suppose, back to his best that we have associated with him in seasons gone by.
There's times when you watch him and you think, what are you doing playing for Edinburgh City? And I know some will say, and there's times I think, what you're doing, like, what are you playing for Edinburgh City? But genuinely, I think that I'm surprised that he's playing at that level because he's got something about him. There may be times where his decision making can let him down. He can hold on to the ball for a wee bit too long, maybe take a wrong option sometimes. But certainly in lower league football, I don't think there is somebody that says you want to see in the ball as much. Maybe like Ross Taylor at Stennismuir in terms of just like pure electric dribbler. Zaid's fantastic. See, just getting the ball in tight spaces, dropping the shoulder, and he's quite slight and he's quite like bendy legged. And he did it a number of times, particularly in the first half where he was picking up the ball and just driving at them. And you saw the goal. He ultimately set the goal up, but you could see Jack Leach wiping him out, like completely sliding in and taking him out the game. And then it's a great finish from Innes Lawson there to slide in and score a goal. But while Zaid's probably the most eye-catching dribbling player, said it before, but they must be the dribbliest team in the league. But you know that way where you've got a side, like maybe you look at the Rovers, for instance, in terms of like ball carriers, you maybe look at Paul McMullen, like Dylan Easton, but they've got so many players that can do that in Edinburgh, like Zaid, James Stokes, Innes Lawson, Robbie Mann, all guys that want to get in the ball and all want to carry it forward. And I can completely understand why Edinburgh City fans, said this a number of times, but I completely understand why Edinburgh City fans just really, really enjoy watching this team. There's so much brio, so much verve, and I was really excited. I think we'd mentioned it on last week's podcast after the 1-1 draw with Annan Athletic. Michael McIndoe said, we're going to go back to a style of play that's more suited to us. We went direct just basically to get points on the board. We needed it to get ourselves out of that 15-point deduction and back in business. But this is when we start playing football the way we should be playing, the way I like to see football play. And I thought it lived up to its billing. I thought the football that we saw from Edinburgh there was more representative of how you and I certainly think of them.
So McIndoe was certainly very, very enthusiastic. He said that's the first time they've played that position, formation for a while. He said he feels that suits his players more. He said, let's face it, this is the second best team. Well, he said it's second versus third, ultimately. I mean, I know he's taking kind of license for that, I suppose. But he was certainly very enthusiastic after the game about how his charges had played. Ultimately, do you think that was warranted in terms of his excitement about the performance?
I do. I think that the only chance of note that East Kilbride had, there were a couple of efforts that were straight at Mark Weir, but he didn't really have much to do. The only time he was really called upon was when he actually had to pick the ball at the back of the net. They won a free kick. I think it was Uzi C playing up front for East Kilbride, does really well to win it, or really well to sort of trick it if he sort of backs into the defender, gets a bit of contact and goes down. And I was behind the goals at the opposite end at K Park there with the Edinburgh fans. And there's a degree of fatalism. I think everyone, as soon as C wins that free kick, everyone's shoulders just slouch down because they know it's going to come. And Connor Young, he hits the ball, and it's the only way you could compare it really is a sort of like a sort of watered down version of, remember the Cristiano Ronaldo's free kick for Manchester United against Portsmouth? Where you're able, the knuckle puck, where you're able to hit the ball really fast and really direct, but it just goes up and over the wall. There's no dip on it. And it's a brilliant goal, brilliant strike, and everyone around me just like, he does it all the time. He was doing this all the time for us. That's what he does. We got a better view of his free kick style when it was the second half, when he was shooting to the way where we were, and he had a couple of efforts that were off target, one wildly off target, but you can see what he's trying to do, just put the laces through it and be able to get that dip. But beyond that, Mark Weir didn't have much to do. A couple of nervous moments where they got the ball down the byline, but they weren't able to find an East Kilbride player. So I think that's why McIndoe would be excited. On top of that, they only had one player on the bench, or one outfield player on the bench, Callum Brodie, who I think has just turned 17 or 18. Really young guy, quite talented apparently. I've yet to properly get a look at him. But he's done well so far in the fact that you've basically got 11 players out there, virtually nothing to turn to. And you're doing this without Eden Lynch, who was suspended. He was actually standing just down for the Edinburgh fans, just shouting at the referee. Like, it's quite funny, actually. He's just screaming at the referee. I think he actually was right to the referee. Had East Kilbride put in a number of quite like maybe overzealous challenges on the Edinburgh players that maybe have warranted caution sooner. Like, for instance, that one from Jack Leach that we mentioned there when he slid in on Zaid in the build-up to Lawson's goal, that ultimately didn't end up in a caution, and it should have done. That was quite a vicious tackle. But you wonder when the game was when East Kilbride had maybe run out of ideas, you maybe wanted to see something different from Edinburgh to test them, and that's the way that's, as Michael McIndoe says, that's how they do things. Edinburgh, they don't rely on the big budgets, they don't rely on big squads. And you just think maybe if you had something a wee bit different in there, you could change things up. Jaden Ferguson, the big striker they signed for Dundee North End, he was let go earlier in the week. I don't think he really quite fitted into what they were looking to do. I think he was signed as a like-for-like replacement for Uzi C, who obviously went to join Kilby. But fitness, talent, I just don't think he was able to fit in with what Michael McIndoe's wanting to do. So it just feels like it's crazy. Like if it was any other manager that says I'm going to run with like one outfield player, you think you're insane. And maybe I still do think Michael McIndoe is slightly insane, but he can get away with it. He's demonstrated. He showed all of like last season and showed parts of this season. They can still compete with their really small numbers.
I know what you mean. And like McIndoe's, I thought his post-match stuff was excellent. Maybe a wee bit longer than usual in terms of like 4 and a bit minutes. And he did kind of touch on the fact that they had one outfield sub. They said one outfield sub, don't mind. Like, we don't mind that. But the thing is, it kind of feels like that's, as much as we are generally wax lyrical about Edinburgh.
What it feels like generally? All the time?
Always. I feel like that's not sustainable. So, and what I mean by that is, they don't lose too many games. They're not winning enough games. There probably isn't in terms of the teams that are looking to kind of reel in, you may be looking at Stirling Albion, you may be looking at Dumbarton. Stirling Albion, Stranraer are picking up results. And I suppose the concern would be, even if Dumbarton and Stirling Albion's poor form was to continue, like they would probably dispense with the manager's services, and at that point you wonder, well, then maybe their fortunes would pick up under another manager. It doesn't feel like there's another team that is really, really bad this season that's going to make it easy for Edinburgh to overtake. And if you only have like 12 outfield players on a Saturday, what happens if your plan A isn't working, so you need to change it up? You can't really do that if you don't have any subs. What happens if a couple of players get injured, or you can only bring off one, so therefore somebody else is going to have to play half fit? I don't think, I know what you mean, like it's a funny thing, and Michael McIndoe is kind of, he said it doesn't matter, we're okay with that, but I don't think that is sustainable over the course of a season for a team that's had a 15-point deduction and is still bottom of the league by quite a margin.
What I would say about that is the only long-term injury is Tui Daramola, who's got a cruciate injury, and how often do cruciate injuries come around? Not very rarely. Very rarely. That's what I mean by that. Yeah, everyone's got a cruciate. I've got a cruciate injury just now myself. What I was going to say is like the team are incredibly fit. Incredibly fit. I was looking at for instance, James Stokes. James Stokes had a tremendous game here, playing sort of like wide on the left. Gave Jordan McGregor a hard time. In fact, you could see in the highlights of Jordan McGregor, he actually kicks the ball past Jordan McGregor, looking at the byline. McGregor just wipes him out because he can't keep up with him. He couldn't keep up with him. Stokes is really good. Like Lawson's really fit. These are guys who are just accustomed to playing football. So like the niggles and muscle injuries, I don't know what it's like. You know how there's some teams where they can accumulate quite a lot of injuries? It just doesn't seem to happen at Edinburgh. And I don't know if that's something down to the preparation or the training that they're put through that's different from other teams. But I agree with you that it might catch up with them. But I do think they've perhaps got a better chance more than others. That's the thing, Shaughan. Every time we talk about Edinburgh City, we always acknowledge the fact it shouldn't work. The team with the smallest budget in the division that could only list 13 players in their match day squad against one of the best resource clubs in part-time football, yet they still were unlucky not to win it. They still kept them at arm's length. They still had the better chances in the game. It's just unfortunate that one of the best chances they created in that second half, it fell to the one player. If you were to list all the players, you've got somebody steaming in as a third man run into the penalty box. Who is the last player you would want to get on the end of this? Everyone would put Lewis MacArthur down at the bottom. Unfortunately, he was the man that finished it. But I do know what you mean. I don't know if Ferguson moving on has freed up some kind of wage, whatever that is. There's a little bit of wriggle room for them to go in and bring in a player. But I still think, I'm still confident. I'm 100% convinced they will pull themselves out of trouble. I still think they're a decent shout for the top four. I know that's crazy to say. I think that come the end of the season, Edinburgh will be free from bother, and even if they do finish 10th, I think they'll win the playoff. That's a shoot. Edinburgh will be fine this season.
Yeah, I sincerely hope you're correct. But what about the home side? I suppose East Kilbride. It felt like they were second best for the kind of bulk of this game. It was interesting. I thought I didn't realise until I watched Mick Kennedy's interview today. Actually,
training.
Like, did I hear that right? So they couldn't train at all.
I think
last
so.
week.
Yeah.
But it was good. And I know we've said this before about Mick Kennedy, that he is not everybody's cup of tea. He doesn't make excuses. He didn't use that as an excuse. He said, no. He goes, we're not going to use that as an excuse. We gave the players stuff to do on Tuesday and Thursday, even though they couldn't train. And they said ultimately we weren't good enough. And we had 25 minutes in the first half. Yeah. But they thought that Edinburgh were probably the better team over the piece. So I thought that was interesting to listen to.
Yeah, I was like listening to Mick Kennedy. There's two managers that I enjoy their perspective in football. You might not always agree with the pair of them, but they're always worth listening to. If you know what I mean. I think it was real, the haves versus the have-nots. I remember looking over at the benches, and the Edinburgh City bench, you've got the two subbies on it, like two teenagers on it. Michael McIndoe, Kirk Crichton, the assistant manager, I think Shaughan Coyle, the goalkeeping coach, and then their physio. So it's just the four of them. And you look over at the East Kilbride bench, it's huge. They were able to list like a full complement of substitutes. And their backroom team's huge. So you've got Mick Kennedy, Simon Ferry, Scott Allen, like Xander Cowie, the goalkeeping coach, Blair Munn, and then a couple of, there must be about 2 or 3 other guys that I didn't recognise. It's enormous. And I can appreciate the need for it if you want to be as good as you possibly can be, and you've got the resources to do it. You're quite entitled to go out there and put together this a really impressive backroom team. But I just thought they just didn't have all that much about them. As I mentioned there, the only real chance they had was from the free kick from which they scored, and a brilliant goal as well. Really good goal from Connor Young. I thought they missed John Robertson. I think he might have been suspended for this one. They missed him, and they just missed. I think he can give them that degree of unpredictability. Just for instance, we covered the 2 each draw between the sides at Meadowbank earlier in the season, and I think it was the same thing again. Actually, we acknowledged that City might have been the better side, but through John Robertson just being able to pull something out of nothing. I think there was Cammy Elliott who scored the goal, where Robertson was able to get the ball on the edge there and whack a shot off the crossbar. There's no other players that are just going to try things as audacious as that. Whacks off the crossbar, comes down for Elliott to score and finish. And I think they missed him. I think Lewis Spence in the middle of the park, they maybe missed him as well. I think that normally it's usually him and Jack Leach that are playing, but I think he had a wee reshuffle. It was Regan Mimna that had to come in there, who was transfer listed earlier in the season. Am I right in saying? I think he's come back in favour. But they just couldn't get going. Cammy Elliott was playing wide on the left. I think he's better through the middle. Uzi C definitely got his qualities, but the Uzi C that I saw playing for Edinburgh City, very, very different. Maybe it's just the foil that he had around him, where C was being used to just basically tee up James Stokes after Connor Young had moved on. The pair of them formed a decent partnership. And it just felt like they were more direct in this game, and I can understand why. That was to try and break Edinburgh's press, because if you're a team that is prone to making mistakes when you're in possession, as they did a couple of times, I think there was they had a chance in the first half that I just didn't quite land. It might have been Lawson or Zaid, I can't quite remember who had the chance. They went direct for it, and I can appreciate that's good. They can mix it up. I think that's been a criticism of East Kilbride in the past, is that they can only play one way. That's just blatantly not the case. They can go direct when the situation demands it, but I never really got going. Thought the best player, and a player who I've been quite impressed with every time I've seen, Joe Baldi. But again, it was just like, it felt like he was doing a lot without doing all that much, if you know what I mean. And I think that the times when they do try to play from the back, I think Freddie Owens is a decent goalkeeper. We saw some of the saves that he made, particularly the two, I think it was from Robbie Mann, the 2 saves that he made. I just don't think he's comfortable playing with the ball from his feet. And I think that there's just a nervousness. Maybe I don't know what it's like in training. You don't know what the dynamics are, but it just feels like, as a fan, I say as a fan, Christ, but as somebody, I wanted Edinburgh to win, obviously, being there, make no bones about that. But just when the ball got played into his feet, you know, the way, because and you can just see like James Stokes like galloping towards you, just with his floppy hair and all that, like some sort of big bandersnatch. It's just, that's the sort of thing. It's just like, oh Jesus Christ, just fucking like launch the ball as far away as you can. So I can understand why East Kilbride went a bit direct, but it just, I think they missed Robertson, and as I know they should have the resources to win a match, even like particularly against on paper a team with Edinburgh's resources. But I would say from a draw was a fair result, but Edinburgh will be disappointed that they didn't win this. I think Mackendall will see it as 2 points dropped.
I suppose the other thing to mention in terms of East Kilbride, I don't know if you noticed it, because like obviously you've been working until we started this podcast, but Nathan Flanagan has left the club. I don't know if you saw that.
Has he?
Yeah. They just said that give him the best wishes. He's moving on with to pursue a different opportunity. I can't remember the exact quote.
Yeah, no, he's an exciting opportunity for his future.
That's it. He's left the club.
Wow,
so bear in mind, that's somebody he's
playing at the weekend. He came off the bench,
scored 5 goals, created another 5 goals. Maybe I know he's maybe not started as many games as maybe we'd have hoped, but he certainly played in the majority of their games this season. So that feels, maybe he's going to. He can't play for another team in Britain until January. Wonder if he's going to Australia.
Yeah, the boy Jack Harkness at Stirling Albion. I saw that he left the club to go to Australia. Maybe he's in the police like Stuart Murdoch, also at Stirling Albion, who had to retire because of stuff that was going on outside of football. You don't know. Maybe I'm sure we'll find out what was happening with Nathan Flanagan on soon. But I think with most other clubs, you would just be like, all right, fair enough. I wish him all the best. But because I think East Kilbride maybe have a reputation of like churning through players, there might be more to it than meets the eye. There probably isn't, but just because it's East Kilbride, that might be the case. But I think a wee bit of food for thought for Kennedy. I did like what he said again in his post-match interview, like going into the changing room and finding out that the Spartans are 4-0 down and thinking this is the absolute perfect opportunity to go top of the table and not being able to take it. So, but I'd put that down to Edinburgh, just a really hard-working bunch of boys. When I was looking at that team there, I was thinking, God, I'd take half this side at Stenny next season. See if Stenny were to go in and sign like James Stokes and like Jason Jarvis and players like that, you'd be like, no bother. We're going to, because we'll be in the Championship next season, of course. But we'll be like, yeah, these are the players who are going to take us into the top flight. So it's just incredible.
You did look very happy. When Edinburgh City took the lead. I saw you in the background just clapping away.
You did. I wasn't going to rush down to the front like the real marks, but no, it was just an applause. Like I quite like Edinburgh, and I liked like Innes Lawson doing the sort of the Jude Bellingham, but he's actually like this big cheeky grin across his face. It's a great goal. As soon as he got slipped in, he was going to finish it. There was a funny moment though from this game. There was an Edinburgh City fan that pitched up about 15 minutes. About 15 minutes after the kickoff, and I was like, Christ, where have you been? And then he sort of like turns his body, and it's absolutely from about his chest all the way down his shoe. He's all covered
stuck in mud.
Apparently, when he left the overflow car park, I think I'm right in saying he said that he tried to take a shortcut next to the river and slipped. So then basically had to go into K Park absolutely caked in mud. So very, very, very funny. But no, I would say East Kilbride, a wee bit of work to do, a disappointment. They are disappointing, but they are like a point off the top of the table. And just a missed opportunity, and like the same, a missed opportunity for Edinburgh City. But they're just two very, very interesting teams to talk about. That's why I love talking about Edinburgh City, because it's just it shouldn't work, and you're saying it's not sustainable. It feels like it's like Edinburgh City are the Mick McCarthy meme of Scottish football. Edinburgh City can't go on. It can, and it will, and they will finish high up the table. That's it. They will finish high up the table. I can feel it. Edinburgh City, I know who they're playing. They've got Camelin in the Scottish Cup.
Yes, I would. I'd expect Edinburgh to win that.
I think that's the big thing. I think the hope is they win that match. I think it'd be the same for pretty much every League One, League Two, every non-league side, non-SPFL side. Sorry, is that you get in the fourth round and maybe you get like Rangers or Celtic away, and it's a huge draw because if Edinburgh City had the finances and they were able to go and sign another couple of players, then just gives him
Makes
that wee
such a
jag.
difference.
Gives him that wee jag. But no, it was good to see him. Good to see Ali Moncrief as well. Really good guy. Always good to catch him. And of course, Darren Mitchell, Wednesday. Good to see him. And just again, one of the best things about being out at the football on Saturday, talking to people about Scotland beating Denmark in the World Cup, and everyone buzzing off it. So, very good. Shaughan, is there anything else to be said about lower league Scottish football?
I don't think so.
No, I think we've been very thorough with the games that we've covered. So I was going to say thank you, but thank you, Shaughan. Thank you, Craig. We will thank you, and thank you, listener, for choosing us as your lower league Scottish football podcast of choice. If you want to hear more and you have the means to do so, please subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. There are hours and hours and hours of content available there for as little as £2 per month. Highly recommended. And if you want to keep the good times rolling about Scotland beating Denmark, there's a really good discussion in there from the Anderson brothers, Craig and Tony, talking about it. And that's really nice. It's great hearing. That's one of my favourite things, just hearing other people's experiences from the game itself. And it was class hearing. I mean, Tony was just in the pub, class. But it was great. Craig Anderson was actually there at the game with his mum and hearing about his experiences. So I really enjoyed that. Also, if you need to explore yourself inappropriately online, the lads at NordVPN will sort you out with all the tools you need to browse the internet with the freedom you deserve. NordVPN.com/terracepod. And that leaves me with just one more thing to say. Enjoy your football, but unlike that wee creep who dressed up as a referee and approached Dundee United manager Jim Goodwin, who was out with his family, and presented him with a red card and then shared the video on his social media accounts, please do so respectfully. I thought that was absolutely appalling.
Yeah, me too.
Just not funny. I know that we don't really cover top flight football in this podcast. We're not allowed to, but that really wound me up. It's just the idea. It's like, I can understand if you're like annoyed at a manager or whatever, then you're just in the pub like talking shit to your mates. But actually, the guy's out on a night out with his family to go up to him and maybe
it was beyond the pale, wasn't it? I didn't like it at all.
And this is the man who accosted Scott Robertson last week. So if anyone knows the risks of embarrassing yourself in front of a lower league superstar, it's me. Listen, just say no. Fuck. There's a reference for the kids there, eh? Brilliant stuff. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Shaughan, thank you. I thought you were going to say thank you there, but thank you.
Thank you.
That's the one. Cheers. Bye.